Vamos a hacer la presentación en inglés porque es más fácil. Pero por supuesto, si hay necesidad de clarificar algo, podemos hacerlo en castellano, ¿no? The first large-scale influx of population in the Chichasoras Valley takes place during Middle Horizon Epoch 2, associated with the how do I? Associated with the introduction of agricultural terracing. Prior to this, the area sees the occasional presence of hunter-gatherer groups in the pre-ceramic, followed by small-scale occupations in the initial period, late intermediate, single sites associated with Chatchichro or Cancha phase material, which originates in the Andahuaylas region, and also a single site which has Huarpa material, both suggestive of small-scale impermanent incursions from the area of Huanta, Ayacucho, and Andahuaylas. Thank you. The Middle Horizon Epoch 2 occupation is characterized by 7 occupation sites in the upper valley at altitudes between 3,300 and 3,600 meters above sea level, followed by, in the late intermediate period, significant population expansion and consolidation of the population in the late horizon and significant reduction of population within the early colonial period. Hand over to you.
Hand over to me. Good afternoon, everyone. So in this part of the presentation, what I'll do is I'll focus on presenting some of the paleoecological and environmental archaeological data that we've collected so far from the Chichasoras Valley. And I'll focus on 2 sites in particular. The Toctatacasa Terrace, which you can see labeled there in the middle of the figure, and also the Ayapampa Maya, so a peatland located in the area, both on the eastern side of the Chichasoras Valley. So the main aim of this sort of part of the research, which is very much ongoing, was to establish the environmental context of the Middle Horizon human activities, to reconstruct the land use history, and to examine then the relationship between the environmental and land use histories and past climate variability. So in this image, you can see the valley looking from the eastern side, the Chichasoras Valley. So the archaeological evidence from the valley itself and the hinterland, Frank started to introduce, but we'll certainly expand upon in a moment. And in this valley, we've got widespread agricultural terrace construction during the Middle Horizon. And it really led to an extraordinary transformation of this landscape from what we perceive to be a very natural landscape to very much a cultural landscape that you can see today. So the landscape in which the terraces were constructed comprised really of a very undulating topography. This is probably due to sort of localized mass movement and fluvial processes that we've recorded between the river margins and the Puna grassland, where this photograph is taken. And in between this area, general area, you've got the natural wetlands that are formed, including peatlands, situated really within heavily weathered and eroded volcanic tuff. So the wetlands are really quite numerous, often forming a catena of sort of shallow water ponds and small lakes. A number of these wetlands have provided us a very important, we believe, environmental and land use records, especially because they are often located proximal to the ancient agricultural terraces. So therefore, picking up that record of land use history, having these wetlands located close to these archaeological structures is particularly important. So I'll focus here on the Pampa wetland. It's situated in the upper Quechuan ecological zone. The paleoecological record from the site, we believe, is broadly representative of the vegetation cover and the land use cover of this part of the valley. But there are certainly some very site-specific characteristics representing very much localized events. So here you can see some of the field samplings. We've revisited this particular wetland just last year collaborating with another number of universities in Peru. And there's some insight into the sort of previous publications that Frank and I have produced from this area. So here's a selected taxa pollen diagram, radiocarbon dated pollen diagram from the peatland. And certainly prior to the onset of the middle horizon, the wetland consisted or dominated by Poaceae, Cyperaceae, Apiaceae, and Plantagenaceae. And there's some photographs there on the right-hand side of the sorts of plants that we think were probably growing on the wetland surface. And those sort of plants, that coverage continued certainly into the middle horizon period. And the reason really for emphasizing the wetland composition is clearly the wetlands we believe were particularly important for the pastoral farming, for grazing during the middle horizon period. The surrounding dryland prior to the middle horizon seems to have certainly there is evidence for Zea mays cultivation. And then you've got various perennials and shrubs of the Asteraceae family, but also evidence for Polylepis and Alnus woodland. The Polylepis, I believe is probably very much underrepresented within the pollen record. And that's something we're going to explore in a little bit more detail in the years to come. There are certainly a number of major erosional events which testify, I think, to the instability of the surrounding landscape, even prior to the terrace construction. But zone 3 there, which I've highlighted in red for you, even though the radiocarbon chronology doesn't really provide us with a precise guide to the onset of the middle horizon for the sequence, we can certainly surmise that throughout this period and into the early part of the late intermediate period, much of that herb-rich grassland and shrubland noted earlier persisted, but there are some significant erosional events, particularly a thick unit of sandy clay that was deposited. And I'll come back to that in a moment. So the wetland, as I say, continued to be dominated by the sort of classic sort of wetland plants that we think were very suitable for grazing, highly nutritious plants that certainly would have been favored by animals grazing in the area. We seem to have an increase in the representation of Chenopodiaceae amaranthacea at this time, and together with the Zea mays, this might suggest an intensification of agricultural practices during the middle horizon. There isn't a continuous record of Zea mays cultivation, but there are sort of sporadic bits of evidence for it during the late intermediate period. But the precise timing of that is a little bit uncertain. We have another pollen record from the western side of the valley, very similar, pre-middle horizon land use with Zea mays and Chenopodiaceae from about 700 AD onwards. And then that seems to get a much stronger picture of the land use, including both of those elements, certainly during middle horizon sort of epoch 2. So we believe, therefore, both records certainly indicate that during the middle horizon, we've got Zea mays and possibly Chenopodiaceae amaranthacea cultivation, accompanied by landscape erosion. The erosional events and the transformation of the landscape morphology due to the terrace construction implies a sort of causal link, so a disturbance of the soil structure, subsequent fluvial and aeolian transportation of sediment into the wetlands, although we're still trying to establish the precise timing of some of these events. The peatlands, as well as the ponds and lakes situated in the valley as a whole and up onto the Puna, probably would have provided some of the main water supplying ecosystems for the irrigated terraced agriculture that kicks off in the middle horizon, as well as, of course, the annual precipitation. So here we can just see an image of one of the modern irrigation canals present in the Chichasaurus today. But my colleague there, Douglas Walsh, who runs an NGO, is pointing to the ancient irrigation system that clearly was obviously the predecessor of the modern one, but they're constructed very much in a similar location. And that seems to be quite a common practice. We also therefore carried out excavations of selected terraces within the valley, and this has revealed a great deal of information about the land use. We believe they were probably constructed during Middle Horizon Epoch 2, which is suggested by radiocarbon dates from charcoal or from paleosols within the terrace fills. Cultivation was largely taking place on terrace soils that were formed from within the volcanic tuff, enriched certainly with organic matter and nutrients due to the rapid weathering of the substrate, but also burning of the terrace surface. And we've done various micromorphological and geochemical studies of these soil profiles. So here you can see the surface of the Middle Horizon Epoch 2 terrace donated by the green line, with the terrace then being subsequently reconstructed during the late intermediate period. The Middle Horizon Epoch 2 terrace surface is shown here in this diagram by the 2B horizon, which I've shaded in green. The phytolith analysis, which is soon to be published in Vegetation History and Archaeobotany by one of Jose and I's PhD students. Josie Hanley is the lead author on it. Frank is obviously involved as well. It seems to provide a very, very clear signal for maize cultivation during Middle Horizon Epoch 2, which supports the pollen data from the adjacent Ayampampa peatland. Okay, these landscape and land use changes, which I've presented in broad outline, also coincide with a period of variable precipitation during the Middle Horizon, according to multiple paleoclimate records now from the Peruvian Andes. These records are derived from a range of archives, ice cores, cave speleothems, lake and marine sediments. So many of the listed at the top there, I think, will be familiar to you. So you can see those key records, and what I've done is I've labeled this diagram with the wetter or drier shifts indicated by these records. And I've also labeled the diagram with the medieval climate anomaly and the little ice age, which is shaded in red and blue respectively. So they have revealed, these records, really important episodes of climate variability during the Middle Horizon, such as the Southern Hemisphere expression of the medieval climate anomaly, which we believe is from about 900 to 1250 AD. And these are really characterized, or this is really characterized by a change in the hydrological cycle, changing precipitation patterns due to variation in the intensity, probably, of the South American summer monsoon. So several of these paleoclimate records clearly indicate that the early part of the Middle Horizon was a period of noticeably higher precipitation, probably from just before 900 AD, possibly before about 800 AD, before declining levels marked the transition to the beginning of the medieval climate anomaly. Although the precise timing of the Middle Horizon terrace construction, remains uncertain. We've got some radiocarbon dates. We believe they probably started in Epoch 2 from about 680 to 700 AD. So the beginning of Epoch 2, based on the pottery we have and the radiocarbon dates we have. So if construction occurred at that time, it was probably during a period, according to these records, of much higher precipitation levels, but transitioning towards lower levels from about 800, 900 AD. So certainly the start of the MCA. Terrace construction and associated irrigation system may therefore have been an adaptation strategy to intensify farming by bringing more land into agricultural production and also taking advantage of increased water availability. Now, although several studies have noticed variation in the timing and onset of the termination of the MCA between archives and the proxy records, it seems certain the MCA was underway by AD 900. That the onset of the MCA occurred during Middle Horizon Epoch 2, we believe has real relevance here, because the lower levels of precipitation at that time may have increased the vulnerability to water stress of these now intensively farmed agricultural systems, possibly reducing their resilience. So the termination of the Middle Horizon, around sort of 1000 AD or so, therefore is unequivocally associated with a period of reduced precipitation, according to these records, and probably drought that started around 800, 900 AD, I say very much within Epoch 2. So persistence of the wetland at Ayampampa amongst many others in the Chicha Valley throughout the Middle Horizon and into the late intermediate period, as shown by the paleoecological records, suggest that they remain really suitable for a prolonged period of time, probably for livestock grazing and drinking water. And these continued despite probable changes in their ecohydrological status due to these declining precipitation levels from about 800 to 900 AD. Okay, Frank, over to you.
The Middle Horizon sites in the valley are characterized by small scale, up to 1 hectare occupations. In this instance, the site of Jaco, which was only occupied during Middle Horizon Epoch II, but other sites are occupied from Middle Horizon Epoch II right through to the early colonial period, with the Middle Horizon Epoch II occupation being concentrated in the site core. There are numerous funerary complexes, mostly found in cave positions, and these have produced textile remains characteristic of a rural elite Wari style clothing. The upper Chichasaurus Valley sites, there are 7 occupation sites, and within the surrounding area there is the tributary of the Rio Yanamayo, which at its upper reaches, some 15 kilometers from the valley, has demonstrated the presence of pastoralist, camelid-focused occupations. The valley sites, as Nick suggested, produced almost certainly maize and possibly quinoa grains. In the area around the pastoralist site complex of Naupallacta, which is at around 3,900 meters altitude, a little bit lower, there are concentrations of agricultural terracing, some 60 hectares of non-irrigated terracing, and some 6 hectares of irrigated terracing. The pastoralist complex comprises 3 site elements, that of Uchi Umai and Hanshu, between 1.1 and 1.6 hectares in size, occupied from Middle Horizon Epoch II through to the late intermediate period, and the largest sector, that of Naupallacta, 4 hectares, with a series of circular corrals, each associated with a habitation structure and a small number of secondary structures, indicative of kitchen and perhaps fiber processing locations. We estimate the population of this site to have been between 150 and 200. The site's divided into 2 main occupation sectors, with an open area in the middle, possibly indicating social divisions. Architectural details include paired niches and small windows. The associated ceramics are exclusively Wamanga style material, which is characteristic of the same type of Wamanga material as is found in the Upper Chicha agricultural sites, whereas within the valley sites you also find Vignacca and black decorated sea material, which has been elsewhere associated with rural elites. Nearby there are the obsidian sources of Lichahuacho and Potrero Pampa. The obsidian artifacts from the area have been attributed to both these sources, and further to the east some 30 kilometers further to the east at Carabamba. There is the nearest Middle Horizon occupation in that direction. The interesting aspect of the setting of the Naupallacta complex is a series of weird geological features comprising conical eroded tufa features, as well as a dome-shaped mountain known as Apopancola, which is still considered as a sacred mountain in the area. This, to us, suggests a particularly vibrant, animated landscape, which would have been of some significant sacred import during the Middle Horizon. The animal bone assemblages from the agricultural sites in the Upper Valley have produced some 4,500 bones dating from the Middle Horizon Epoch through to the early colonial period. About a quarter of this material is of Middle Horizon date, and both in terms of the species represented, between 93 and 97% being camelid, and the bone elements present and the age distributions. Nothing changes from Middle Horizon Epoch II until you get to the early colonial period, when there is a shift to much younger animals in the age profiles. The animal bone elements present for the Middle Horizon comprise largely skull, humerus, pelvis, and metapodials. Ribs and vertebrae are largely absent, these being the largest meat-carrying fragments likely to have been either left at the camelid management sites or exported elsewhere in the form perhaps of charqui. Age profile for the Middle Horizon material, 81.5% senior than 2 years in age, suggesting that these animals, these camelids, were used for fiber and transport primarily. Where it was possible to identify the camelid bone to subspecies, these were represented by alpaca and vicuña. The sizes where measurements were possible suggest smaller size camelids, also suggesting therefore alpaca and vicuña. And the DNA, the preliminary DNA results for the mitochondrial DNA similarly suggest alpaca, supporting a fiber production emphasis for the area, further supported by the large numbers of spindle whorls identified in the assemblages from the valley sites. We therefore suggest that during Middle Horizon Epoch II, the Wari states introduced the population into this area who were focusing on the production of fiber, with the pastoralists being supported by the valley residing terraced agriculture groups. Why choose the Upper Yanamayo area for this camelid management base camp area? We think the landscape features making this landscape a sacred area would have been of importance. The presence of perhaps relic genua tree woodland in numerous quebradas would have been of import with regards to fuel and timber, as well as the close vicinity of the obsidian sources within 1.5 to 10 kilometers from these sites. In the later periods, you have the presence of the Anta and Mayo Ayus in the area, hinting at people from the valley and people from the Puna. The Anta being the cloud people. And that is what we've got for you today.
Thank you.
Thank you.